I miss you now, Dad. I stood next to my father, watching him type that message into his phone with an urgent expression. Those two words, now, made my blood run cold. Not, I miss you, but I miss you now. Now, when my grandfather Martin Hobbs's name had just appeared in the Portland Tribune with the headline, Local Hotelier Builds Boutique Empire from Ground Up. The newspaper photo showed him standing in front of the Evergreen Inn, a luxurious boutique hotel in downtown Portland. He wore an elegant gray suit, smiling confidently. The article wrote about his chain of 6 hotels, about his philosophy of authentic hospitality, about how he'd turned a small investment into a multi-million-dollar empire. "Sarah, set the table for 5 tonight." Dad turned to me, his voice unusually enthusiastic, eyes lighting up like he'd just won the lottery. "Your grandfather is coming for dinner." My jaw dropped, the newspaper still trembling in my hands. "Grandpa? Does he know you're inviting him?" "Of course he knows. I just texted him." Dad waved dismissively, as if 3 years of silence was just a brief intermission. Nothing significant. 3 years. 3 years we hadn't called him. No one mentioned his 80th birthday last month, a major milestone we let pass like any ordinary day. And now, one cold text message would bring him back, just because he was now wealthy and successful? My stomach twisted. I watched Mom cleaning the living room with an anxious expression, as if preparing to welcome a VIP guest. Not because she missed him, but because she wanted to impress him. If you're watching this video, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because what happened at that dinner would completely change my perspective on family, and on myself. This is a story about greed, about self-respect, and about how an 80-year-old man taught his family a lesson they would never forget. My name is Sarah Hobbs, 26 years old, working as a marketing assistant at a startup in Portland, Oregon. I grew up in a middle-class family, not wealthy, but not lacking. My father, David Hobbs, was a businessman with big ambitions, but few successes. My mother, Patricia, was a practical woman who always calculated the benefits in every relationship. My grandfather, Martin Hobbs, my father's father, was a man I once loved dearly. In my childhood, I loved visiting his small house in East Portland. It was an old but warm wooden house with a backyard full of roses he carefully tended. He used to say, "Sarah, customer service isn't just a job, it's an art." Those words stayed with me. I still remember those Saturday afternoons when he'd take me downtown Portland, pointing out various hotels, large and small, telling me about his time as a concierge at the Hilton, then front desk manager at Marriott. He talked about how he learned to remember each guest's name, their preferences, making them feel at home every time they checked in. People don't remember what you say, Sarah. They remember how you make them feel. But everything changed when I turned 13. My parents began complaining about having to take care of him. It wasn't that he was sick or needed help. He was still healthy, independent, even working part-time at a small hotel. The issue was simply that he no longer brought any value to the family. "He's just a burden now," Mom said once when I was 15, her voice full of frustration. "Your grandfather never saved properly for retirement. We can't keep helping him forever." I was surprised because he'd never asked us for money. He always paid his own bills, even brought gifts whenever he visited. But my parents decided he was a potential financial burden. Someday he'd need a nursing home, medical bills would pile up, and who would have to pay? They would. "We need to focus on our own future, Sarah," Dad explained once when I asked why we weren't inviting him for Thanksgiving. "Your college tuition is coming up. We're saving for a bigger house. We can't afford to be responsible for him, too." I was 16, not brave enough to ask, "But he's your father?" I just stayed silent and let them decide. From then on, visits to him became increasingly rare. His birthday? We're too busy with work. Thanksgiving? We already have plans with Mom's side of the family. Christmas? Maybe next year, Dad. We're going skiing in Bend this year. Each time they declined, I saw his eyes grow a little sadder. He didn't complain, didn't beg. He just said, "That's okay. You all have your own lives." But the way he said it, calm but deeply hurt, made me want to cry. I felt guilty each time we were absent, but I was a weak child who didn't dare oppose my parents. I consoled myself that he understood, that he didn't blame me, but deep down I knew I was doing something wrong. Each passing day, the distance between us and him grew, not just physically, but emotionally. 3 years ago, we completely cut off contact with him. No phone calls, no texts, no emails. Mom even blocked his number after he called to check in one last time. He needs to understand we've moved on, Mom said, as if he were an annoying ex-boyfriend, not her father-in-law. He vanished from our lives. And I, in my cowardice, let it happen. I didn't call him, didn't text. I lived with guilt every day, but did nothing to fix it. Because doing the right thing meant confronting my parents. And I wasn't strong enough. Until today. At 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Mom opened the door with a bright, fake smile. "Dad, so good to see you." Mom hugged him, but he only patted her shoulder lightly before stepping back. Grandpa walked in, white hair neatly combed, elegant gray suit, his pale blue eyes still sharp. He didn't look old or weak at all. On the contrary, he exuded a calm authority I'd never recognized. He carried a black leather briefcase, unusual for a family dinner. "Patricia, David, Sarah." He nodded to each person, his voice deep and steady. "Thank you for the invitation." Dad stepped forward to shake his hand, flashing a wide smile. "We've missed you, Martin. It's been too long." "Has it?" he asked lightly. "I didn't realize time passed differently for you than it did for me." A moment of silence, but Dad quickly deflected. "Come, sit down. Dinner's almost ready." Dinner was a terrible performance. Mom constantly praised his business talent. Dad asked about the hotels with exaggerated interest. I sat silently, embarrassed and uncomfortable. "So, Martin," Dad began after the appetizer, "I read about your hotel chain in the Tribune. Very impressive. I didn't know you were involved in hospitality at this scale." "You never asked," he replied, cutting his steak slowly. Dad laughed dryly. "Well, we're asking now. Tell us about it." He set down his knife and fork, looking directly at Dad. "What do you want to know, David?" "Everything. How did you build it? When did you start? We always thought you were just retired." "You thought I was broke," he said bluntly. "Let's not pretend." Mom's face flushed red. "Dad, that's not fair." "Isn't it?" he interrupted, his voice still calm but ice cold. 3 years, Patricia. 3 years without a single call. Not even on my 80th birthday. I waited by the phone that whole day. Nothing. Not even a text. But today, one article in the newspaper, and suddenly I get an invitation to dinner. Mom swallowed hard. Dad placed a hand on Mom's arm, trying to reassure her. "We've been busy," Dad argued weakly. "So have I," he said. "I've been busy building a business. I've been busy honoring a friend's legacy. I've been busy living my life without waiting for scraps of attention from people who only care when there's something to gain." I didn't dare look at anyone. The tension in the room felt ready to explode. I felt like I was sitting on a time bomb. "Look, Martin," Dad sighed, changing tactics, his voice softer. "I know we haven't been good family members. And I'm sorry, truly. I can't change the past, but we're here now. We want to reconnect. And," he hesitated, weighing each word, "I want to help you." "Help me?" He raised an eyebrow, almost amused by this performance. "Yes, managing a hotel chain at your age, it must be exhausting. You're 80 years old, Dad. You should be enjoying retirement, not working yourself to the bone. I have business experience. I've managed teams, handled operations. Let me take some of the load off your shoulders. I can invest, help with day-to-day operations, maybe even take over management completely so you can finally enjoy your golden years. Travel, play golf, relax. You've earned it." That's when I understood my father's scheme. He didn't want to help Grandpa. He wanted to take the hotels. He wanted control. He wanted ownership. Grandpa smiled, a cold, meaningful smile, like someone who'd already anticipated every move. That's very generous of you, David. Very generous indeed. But before we discuss my golden years and your generous offer to help, I brought something for you all. He bent down, opened the black leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick brown envelope. He placed it on the table, right between the half-eaten pot roast. "What's this?" Mom asked, her eyes lighting up like a child seeing Christmas presents. "Open it," he said, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. Dad opened the envelope, pulling out a thick stack of papers. His face went from eager to confused to deathly pale. His hands trembled as he flipped through each page. This is a detailed financial report," Grandpa explained, his voice like a professor lecturing, "of my hotel business. Revenue, expenses, profit margins, property values, debt-to-equity ratios, cash flow statements for the past 3 years. I thought you'd want to see exactly what you're so eager to help me with before making such a generous offer." Dad flipped through pages, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Mom grabbed several pages, reading with an expression of shock, eyes widening until I thought they'd fall out. This says the chain is worth over $12 million, Mom whispered, her voice choked. 12.3 to be exact, he said. Not bad for someone you thought was a burden. Not bad for an old man you couldn't even bother to call on his birthday. My jaw dropped. $12 million? My grandfather was a millionaire? The man my parents abandoned because they thought he was poor? How? Dad asked, his voice trembling, full of disbelief. Where did you get the money to start this? Grandpa looked at Dad with cold eyes. You want to know? Fine. Let me tell you a story, David. A story you would have heard years ago, if you'd bothered to stay in touch. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as if returning to the past. 20 years ago, in 2005, I met a man named Charles Brennan. He was a veteran hotelier, worked in the industry for 35 years, managed some of the finest hotels in the Pacific Northwest. He was brilliant but struggling with health issues. Stage 3 lung cancer. The doctors gave him 5 years, maybe less. He paused, taking a sip of water. Charles had a vision, boutique hotels that offered personal, authentic experiences instead of corporate uniformity. Small properties, 15 to 20 rooms each, with unique designs reflecting local culture. He wanted to build something meaningful, not just profitable. He asked me to invest and help him build it. Said he needed someone he could trust. Someone who understood hospitality from the ground up. You had money to invest? Mom asked, unable to hide the insulting surprise in her voice. He looked at Mom with eyes full of disappointment. I had savings, Patricia. $200,000 I earned over 40 years of hard work. Money I saved by living below my means, by driving used cars, by eating at home instead of restaurants. Money I chose to invest wisely instead of spending on things I didn't need to impress people who didn't care. Dad's jaw swallowed, his jaws flushing red. Charles and I started with one small hotel in Eugene, the Oakwood Inn. 16 rooms, all wood-paneled, with a library and fireplace in the lobby. We did everything ourselves at first. I handled front desk, housekeeping coordination, guest relations. Charles focused on operations and business development. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and it felt good to build something with purpose. He smiled gently, a smile full of nostalgia. The Oakwood was profitable within 18 months. We opened a second property in Bend, the Ponderosa Lodge, then Portland, then Salem, then Ashland, then Cannon Beach. Each one unique, each one profitable. Charles managed to live longer than the doctors predicted. Not 5 years, but 15. He said it was because he had something to live for. He paused, swallowing with difficulty, his eyes reddening. 5 years ago, in 2020, Charles passed away. Lung cancer finally got him. He died peacefully, surrounded by his hotel staff, the people he considered family since he had no biological children. In his will, he paused, his voice choking. He left everything to me. All 6 hotels, full ownership, the entire business. Not 50%, not 70, 100%. He just gave it all to you? Dad asked, disbelieving, his voice full of doubt. He looked directly into Dad's eyes. He trusted me, David. He knew I would honor his vision and take care of his employees. He knew I wouldn't sell out to corporate chains for a quick profit. He knew I understood what he built wasn't just a business. It was a legacy, and I have honored that trust. Every single employee Charles hired is still with us. Every hotel still operates under his principles. I didn't change a thing except to make it better. Why didn't you tell us? Mom asked, her voice full of resentment, as if he owed them an explanation. He looked directly into Mom's eyes, and for the first time tonight, I saw a real pain in his gaze. Because I wanted to see who you really were, Patricia. I wanted to know if my own son and daughter-in-law would care about me without money being involved. I wanted to know if you'd visit me, call me, remember my birthday, not because I was rich, but because I was family. And I got my answer. Mom said nothing. Her face was pale as paper. When you stopped visiting, stopped calling, I knew. You thought I had nothing to offer. You saw me as a financial liability, a future burden on your mortgage, your vacation fund, your precious retirement savings. So I let you go. I didn't chase after you. I didn't beg for your attention. I focused on my work, on honoring Charles's legacy, on building something meaningful that would outlast me. He looked at Dad, his eyes cold as ice. And now, David, you want to help me. You want to invest, to manage, to take over so I can enjoy retirement. But we both know what you really want. You want control. You want ownership. You want to cash in on something you never built, never earned, never even knew existed until you read about it in the newspaper. Dad opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. He'd been caught red-handed, stripped bare at the dinner table. I just think you deserve to rest, Dad stammered, trying to defend himself. To enjoy your golden years. My golden years are now, he interrupted decisively. Running these hotels, working with my staff, serving guests. That's what gives my life meaning. Charles made sure the operations were well organized before he passed. Each property has a capable general manager who's been with us for years. They handle day-to-day operations. My role is oversight, strategic vision, and maintaining the culture Charles and I built. I work maybe 20 hours a week, David. Not 80, not even 40. He paused, his eyes never leaving Dad's. Charles knew what he was doing. Before he died, he spent 2 years preparing for his absence. He promoted from within, cross-trained staff, documented every process, created redundancies. Each manager has autonomy but also accountability. They don't need me hovering over them every day. They need me to trust them, which I do. Because that's what good leaders do. They build systems that work without them. Dad's mouth hung open, unable to speak. And even when I do pass away, he continued, his voice calm but determined, the business will continue. I've already set up a trust. The hotels will be managed by a board consisting of the current general managers and an outside financial advisor. Profits will be reinvested into the business and employee benefits. This isn't about inheritance, David. This is about preserving a legacy. And you, he pointed directly at Dad, you will not get your hands on it. The air in the room seemed to stop moving. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, Mom's labored breathing, the sound of Dad's sweaty palms rubbing against the wet napkin. I don't need your help, David, he concluded, and I certainly don't need you taking what doesn't belong to you. What I needed 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, was a son who cared. A son who called. A son who showed up. Not because I had money, but because I was his father. But you couldn't even give me that. Dad sat motionless like a statue, his face like ash. Mom hung her head, tears falling onto the now cold pot roast. Dinner ended in oppressive silence. Grandpa left with a promise to keep in touch, a sarcastic promise everyone understood the real meaning of. I won't block your numbers, but don't expect anything from me. 2 weeks later, my parents changed tactics. They called him frequently, 1 call per day. They sent flowers to his house every week, expensive roses with cards reading "Thinking of you, Dad," and "We love you." They invited him over on weekends, Sunday brunch, Friday dinner. He was polite but distant, always finding reasons to politely but firmly decline. Sorry, I have a meeting with the general managers this Sunday. Can't make it Friday, training new staff at the Oakwood. Saturday, I'm visiting properties in Southern Oregon. He doesn't trust us, Mom complained one evening after the 5th consecutive rejection. We were sitting in the living room, the atmosphere heavy. He thinks we only want his money. He won't give us a second chance. Because that's exactly what we want, I said coldly, unable to keep silent anymore. It was the first time I'd dared to directly oppose Mom. We don't want him. We want his money. Mom turned to look at me, her eyes sharp as razors. Don't be naive, Sarah. This is about family legacy. That money should stay in the family. Your grandfather is 80 years old. He could die any day. And then what? That trust of his means everything goes to strangers, his employees, his board. We get nothing. Zero. Grandpa is family, I emphasized, and you treated him like trash, like a burden. Now that he has money, suddenly he becomes family legacy. Watch your tone, young lady, Dad warned, his voice dangerous. Enough, Dad shouted, standing up. We need a new approach. Clearly the nice route isn't working. I didn't like the way Dad said new approach. That sound made me shudder. A month later, I accidentally overheard Dad's phone call. It was late, nearly 11 at night. I went downstairs to get water and heard Dad's voice from his office, low, cautious, full of secrecy. I stopped by the door, holding my breath to listen. Something wasn't right. Dad never worked this late. Yes, I need someone who can create bad reviews for a hotel chain, Dad said, his voice slow and clear. Hobbs Hotels. 6 properties across Oregon. Yes, all of them. My heart raced faster. I set the water glass on the kitchen counter, my hands trembling. What kind of complaints? I don't know. Bedbugs, dirty rooms, rude staff, noise issues, overcharging. Make it believable but damaging. No. Spread them out over 2 weeks so it doesn't look coordinated. Use different accounts, different IP addresses. Make it look organic. I covered my mouth to keep from crying out. Dad was hiring someone to sabotage Grandpa's hotels. How much? 5,000? Fine. I'll wire half now, half when the reviews are live. No, absolutely nothing traceable to me. This stays between us. Good. Send me your Bitcoin wallet address. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just greedy. This was criminal. This was fraud, defamation, could lead to prison time. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise. I went back to my room, closed the door, and slumped to the floor with trembling legs. I didn't know what to do. If I told Grandpa, my parents would know I betrayed the family. They'd kick me out. I didn't have enough savings to rent my own apartment. But if I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in destroying his career. The career he and Charles had spent 20 years building with sweat and tears. I remembered his eyes at that dinner, the pain when looking at Dad, at Mom. I remembered his voice when talking about Charles, about legacy, about honoring what had been built. I remembered those childhood afternoons when he took me downtown, showed me the hotels, taught me about hospitality, about treating people with dignity. I couldn't let Dad destroy that. I couldn't. Even if it meant losing my family. After a sleepless night, eyes swollen from crying, I made my decision. The next morning I made an excuse about going to work early, but actually drove the other direction, toward downtown Portland. I called Grandpa from the car. Grandpa, I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Can we meet today? Now? Sarah? He sounded surprised, worried. Is everything okay? Are you hurt? No, My voice choked. I'm not hurt. But Grandpa, please, I need to see you. There's something you need to know before it's too late. Come to the Evergreen, he said immediately, his voice serious. I'll be in the lobby. Grandpa met me at the Evergreen Inn. We sat in the lobby with coffee, afternoon light streaming through the windows. What's wrong, Sarah? He asked, concerned. I told him everything, Dad's phone call, the sabotage plot, hiring people to post fake reviews. My voice trembled, tears flowing. I'm so sorry, Grandpa. I should have stood up to them years ago. He placed his hand on mine. Sarah, you're here now. That's what matters. What are you going to do? He smiled with determination. I'm going to protect what Charles and I built, and teach your father a lesson he won't forget. Over the next 2 weeks, fake reviews appeared. They alleged bedbugs, rude staff, overpriced rooms. Some guests complained about non-existent issues, people Dad hired. But he was prepared. He'd hired private investigator Roy Henderson. Roy discovered everything. Fake reviewers' addresses, bank transfers from Dad's account, recordings of the calls. He didn't act hastily. He waited until he had enough evidence, a clear pattern of fraud and defamation. A month after the conspiracy began, Grandpa invited our family to a family dinner at the Evergreen Inn. My parents thought he'd softened. But when we entered the private dining room, I knew something was wrong. Not just Grandpa, but also Roy Henderson, his lawyer, a stern, middle-aged woman named Diane Foster, and 3 hotel managers. What's going on? Dad asked, growing wary. Sit down, David, Grandpa said, his voice cold as ice. We sat. Diane opened her laptop, projecting a presentation onto the screen. For the past month, Diane began, Mr. Hobbs' hotels have been targeted by a defamation campaign, fake reviews and sabotage. First slide, screenshots of fake reviews. At first, we thought it was a competitor, Diane continued, but our investigation revealed something more personal. Next slide, bank statements with highlighted transactions. Dad's name clear as day. Dad's face went deathly pale. That's private, obtained legally through subpoena, Diane said. Next slide, transcript of Dad's phone call, his voice clearly recorded. I need someone who can create bad reviews. Yes, Hobbs Hotels. Nothing traceable to me. Mom looked at Dad, eyes wide. David, what did you do? Dad didn't answer, trembling. Grandpa stood up, walked over to stand before Dad. You tried to destroy what I built, David. You tried to ruin Charles's legacy. Not because you needed money, just because you wanted it. You wanted control. He paused, his voice pained. But here's what you don't understand. Family isn't just about shared blood. Real family is about showing up, not just when there's something to gain, but when there's nothing to take. You failed that test. Mom stood up, tears flowing. Dad, please. No, he shook his head. I'm done listening to empty apologies. He turned to Diane. What are my options? Civil suit for defamation and economic damages, Diane replied. We can also report this for fraud investigation. If convicted, Mr. Hobbs could face up to 5 years in prison and $125,000 in fines. Dad slumped in his chair, face like ash. Please, Martin, I'll do anything. Anything? He asked. Where was that 3 years ago, on my 80th birthday? Heavy silence. He sighed. I'm not pressing criminal charges. Not because you deserve mercy, but because I'm tired of this drama. He looked at Dad. But I am filing a civil suit, and you will pay, financially and publicly. I'll be ruined, Dad whispered. Yes, he said, just like you tried to ruin me. Over the next month, the lawsuit went to court. Dad hired a lawyer, but the evidence was too clear. The court ruled in Grandpa's favor, ordering Dad to pay $850,000 in economic damages and emotional distress. Dad didn't have that money. He'd invested everything in a failed real estate project the year before. The court's judgment forced him to sell the house, liquidate assets. We lost the suburban house with the beautiful backyard where I grew up. My parents had to move into a small rental apartment in East Portland, an area Mom once looked down on. Mom tried calling Grandpa, crying for forgiveness, for help. He was polite but clear. "Patricia, I forgive you, but I will never forget, and I will not rescue you from the consequences of your own choices." "We're your family," Mom cried. "No," he said gently but firmly. "You stopped being my family the moment you saw me as a burden instead of a person. Real families don't abandon each other when times are tough. Real families don't wait for someone to become successful before showing love." He paused, his voice pained but steadfast. "I'm setting boundaries now, Patricia. Clear boundaries. I will not let you manipulate me. I will not let you exploit me. You are welcome to rebuild your lives, but you'll do it without my money, without my connections, and without expecting me to clean up your messes." Mom hung up, still crying. After 6 months, my parents had changed. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Dad found a sales job at a mid-sized company, not glamorous like he dreamed, but stable. Mom worked part-time at a boutique clothing store. They learned to live within their income, learned to appreciate what they had, instead of always craving what wasn't theirs. They stopped calling Grandpa, not out of resentment, but because they knew he needed space. They wrote letters instead of calling, short, simple letters, asking for nothing. "Dad, I hope you're well. I'm sorry for everything. I understand if you don't want to respond. Just know that I'm trying to be better. Patricia." He sometimes replied, brief, polite emails. The relationship didn't return to what it was, perhaps never would, but at least there was honesty. There were boundaries. There was respect. And me? I left my parents' house after the lawsuit. I couldn't live with them anymore. Not because I hated them, but because I needed to find myself. Grandpa invited me to work at his hotels, not because I was his granddaughter, but because he believed I had potential. I started with an entry-level position in marketing, learning from scratch, no shortcuts. "Sarah," he said on my first day of work, "I'm not giving you this job out of pity or obligation. I'm giving you a chance because you showed up when it mattered. You told me the truth even when it was hard. That's the kind of person I want on my team." He placed his hand on my shoulder. "But remember this, earning respect is a daily practice, not a one-time event. You have to show up, every day, with integrity, with effort, with humility. Can you do that?" I nodded, tears streaming down. "Yes, Grandpa, I will." 2 years later, I became marketing director of the hotel chain. My work wasn't just typical marketing campaigns. I helped him tell his story, the story of a man abandoned by family who rebuilt his life. We created a blog series, Never Too Late, Stories of Second Chances, on the hotel website. The response exceeded expectations. Hundreds of emails from elderly people feeling useless after their children grew up, feeling forgotten by society. My children stopped calling. I felt like a burden. But now I'm starting a catering business from home. If Martin can build a hotel empire at 75, I can bake cookies at 68. Grandpa became a symbol of elder empowerment in Oregon. He spoke to them at senior centers. "Your value doesn't diminish with age. You still have time, wisdom, and purpose." We launched the Senior Hospitality Internship, a free training program for people over 60. 12 participated in the first cohort. 5 were hired full-time after training. A woman named Helen, 72, cried as she told me, "My kids put me in a nursing home because they said I couldn't care for myself. But I wasn't sick, just lonely. This job gave me back my dignity." My parents occasionally visited him during holidays. They no longer demanded anything. They just came, sat drinking coffee, talked about everyday life. It wasn't an ideal relationship, but it was real. One afternoon, Grandpa and I sat in the Evergreen Inn lobby, watching guests check in. "Grandpa," I asked, "do you regret cutting them off?" He thought for a moment. "I regret that it had to happen, but I don't regret my decision. People need consequences to grow. Love with